treat your family and your friends and have faith. Treat the least person that you run into like they're the most important person. It's easy to assume you're going to be successful, and you should always believe and be confident that you're going to be successful. But you should also be willing to do the hard work.
Hello and welcome to AudioLife. And today we have a great guest on board with us. And here we're getting ready to share his story. And here at AudioLife, what we do, we tell your story in your voice. So, John, without further ado, I'd just like to welcome you here. I hope your day's going well. We're delighted to have you here in AudioLife. And as I mentioned, your surname Marckx has an incredibly unique spelling, and it's something intriguing. And so right off the bat, when were you born, and is there a story behind your name?
Yeah, I was born in Seattle, Washington in 1934, so I'm 88 years old. The origin of our name is we are Flemish. We're Belgian. My grandparents were born in Belgium, immigrated to the United States, to Michigan, where they met and married. And my grandmother had a total of 13 children.
Oh, wow. 13 children. A lot of great stories can be had with brothers and sisters, but perhaps you have something told to you by your parents or heard any stories about your birth in particular.
I'm a little quizzical on that one. Not about me necessarily. I'm the oldest of 7 children. 6 survived. Most of my brothers and sisters are alive today. One of my brothers passed away 4 years ago.
Well, that brings me on to something, with the evocation of memory and things that we'll never forget. What was perhaps your earliest memory? Something that really was a strong memory for you in your childhood?
I would start by just reciting a little bit about the family migration, if you will. My dad was in Seattle. He worked as a bread man. He had a desire to start his own business. We had a house in Seattle. He sold the house to save money to buy the business. We lived in an apartment for a while until we moved. We moved to a small town in Oregon where my dad bought the business for $3,000. That's all he could save. And he had put away money for my college education starting in 1936, 37. And he had $40 put away in a bank that he had promised would be for my education. And he would talk to me that way because, I was always talking to him about his business, who he did as a bread man, how he managed his truck and his customers. We moved to the small town of Gresham, Oregon, which is now a suburb of Portland. But that in those days, it was 12 miles east of Portland on this near Mount Hood. And it was pretty much an agricultural community where they grew mainly berries. When I got to be about 5 years old, my family decided it was time to start school. There were no kindergartens in the public schools, and I wasn't of age to go to public school because I was only 5.5 years old. So my mom found a parochial school, a Catholic school in Portland, and my dad had an arrangement with a local bus company because my dad in business knew the guy that owned a freight company. He also owned a bus company. So instead of having to pay 15 cents for the ride to Portland, my dad negotiated a 10-cent fare. So 10 cents was what I had every morning, 2 dimes, get on the bus at the corner and ride with all the people going to work, leaving the small town and going to Portland for their work. So I was 5.5 years old. My mom took me the first day, and then after that, I was on my own. I stopped at the corner where the school was, and it was 3 or 4 blocks away. And so I walked in the rain. It rains every day in Portland, almost every day. And so I walked to the school for the 3 blocks. I only missed my bus one time in my entire 6 years in that school. My brother was about 3 or 4 years younger, and he started school when he was old enough. He was 6. By this time, I was almost 10. He would get on the bus with me, and he wasn't quite responsible sometimes. He would be late, and I'd be dragging him down the 3 blocks to the bus stop, make sure he got on. And if he was there at the bus stop, he would sometimes he'd start a fight with the other kids. So I had to manage him. Eventually, after 2 years of this, my parents took me out of that school and let my brother fend for himself by himself. So that's my earliest recall, memories of being self-sufficient. And what that did was that set me up for a lifetime of travel and self-sufficiency. So that's the end of that little piece.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I mean, just the idea of a little 5-year-old kid getting a bus to Portland every day, the pouring rain. I guess it teaches you to grow up quite quickly and probably set yourself up, as you said, for many of your future life events from that. You know, it's interesting. Your beliefs can be shaped, I guess, from experiences like that. And so I had to ask the following question. Who are the people who most influenced your beliefs, perhaps particularly at that young age? And as you develop, I feel that you got a very strong infrastructure and setup from your parents, with that resiliency and being the eldest to work hard. But perhaps you could expand on that a little bit.
I got my value system from my dad, my mom, hard work, education. Basically, it's family and faith and friends are the credo I go by.
That's amazing. And do you feel like your beliefs may have changed from when you were young? If you look back, do you see perhaps today you look at the world a little bit differently? Or do you feel they've been pretty firm throughout?
No, my standards, my morals, my morality, my set of life tenets haven't changed. They were inculcated early and they remain firm.
I love that. Perhaps then I could talk a little bit about your children, who some of I've had the pleasure of meeting. What's the belief you would most want your children to share with you?
My wife and I have 4 children. They're all hard workers. They all have a firm belief in family and support the family and almost everything.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I can vouch for that for Joe, at least. He's an incredible hard worker, and I can see where he gets it from. So I want to take you back a little bit to some of those interactions that you had when you were at school. I mean, it's just fascinating. Were there other children that you would be friends with during that period, coming from another city and coming across the town? Could you explain a little bit about a general day at your life there at school, what you got up to, perhaps what subjects you enjoyed studying, or any kind of experience that really sticks out from that period of your life?
I'm a little hazy on that one. Those fellows that were in school, those ladies in school, and that was a small class. This was a small school with small class. Those people are pretty well moved away, or they've passed away. I would say in my first classroom there were 3 grades: first, second, and third grade. None of us went to kindergarten. We just went to school, and one row was the first grade, one row was the second grade, one row was the third grade. We had a nun that taught us, and she taught every person based on what their skill level or intelligence level was.
Fantastic. And in some ways, it's like streamlining the children. And if you've got the capacity to learn, they were happy to share with you that knowledge. How about as you develop into a teenager, what are some of the strongest memories you have from that period of your life?
Yeah, I was always anxious to learn to drive, get the car, drive. That was a big deal. We had bakery trucks and we had cars, family cars. And as soon as I could drive 16, that was important because then I could drive a bakery truck and drive in my dad's business. So I can recall one time I was probably 16. My dad said, we're going to Chicago and we're going to bring back 3 trucks. So these trucks were specially outfitted to support the bakery and the kind of delivery that we did, which was house to house. We went to each house and had customers, and we needed to have a special cut on the trucks to make it efficient for delivery and for the customer to see the goods. My dad and I flew to Chicago. We met with some consulting firms that had devised this technique for the trucks and also had devised some other aspects of updating our business model. We didn't call it a business model, but that's what it was. So I was 16. I was learning my dad's business. We went to a small town near Chicago and got the trucks. I drove one. My dad had one, and he towed one. Now we had to drive those trucks about 2,000 miles back to Oregon. There wasn't an interstate highway system yet, so you drove on roads through towns all the way across America. So I can remember rural Illinois, rural Iowa, rural Nebraska, Wyoming, then Idaho, and then finally into Oregon. That was quite an adventure. And I can remember the last day getting so freaking tired because it was summertime and it was warm and I was drowsy after dinner and just trying to stay awake. And of course, the roads were sometimes gravel and sometimes paved, but I'd start to nod off. But somehow or other, I stayed with it, and we arrived back in Oregon. That's a teenage recollection.
Oh, I absolutely love that story, John. It must have been challenging at that age, to be driving these big vans and so on across town, as you mentioned, without these commercial interstates and so on, the different types of terrain, the roads, the long hours. It's some adventure for a kid that age, I'll tell you that.
As a teenager, you like to drive, but then when you have to drive it for real for 3 days, that's a different thing. I would just correct you on that. The size of the truck, it's a panel truck. It's a 2,000 pound truck. It's not a big van, not a lorry.
Gotcha. But still, nonetheless impressive. Well, taking from that, I have to ask you, you seem like a very industrious kid, even into your teenage years, you're working really hard, you're driving, long distances, long hours. Tell me a little bit about your personal teenage life, perhaps what hobbies you were interested in or any recollection or experiences with friends you had around that time.
I had a health problem when I was in the 8th grade. Before the 9th grade, my mother decided I would go to a different school. I went to that one school for a year, and then my health returned. I was still rather small. Our family tends to grow later, and so I was probably in the 8th grade. I was 5'2" and 90 pounds. I know that because that's the official height and weight they put on me on the football program. I was so small. I was, a second string and never really got into more than 4 games. So that was when I was in the 8th grade. In the 9th grade, I was sick for part of the year. I went to a new school then in my 10th grade. I thrived in school. I was in honors and did quite well. We were taking a college prep course. In those days, it was 2 years of Latin, 4 years of science, 4 years of English, 4 years of religion, 4 years of math, and so on. So I did pretty well in all the subjects. And so senior year, I had physics, ended up, I graduated on time in 4 years. My senior year, I was the manager of the basketball team. The basketball team was a very competitive team. They were number one in the state for most of the year, and they lost in the state championship. So that was my senior year in high school. But I was playing basketball all the time with CYU locally and other games, but I wasn't good enough to make the high school team because they were very good. So, but as the manager of the team, I got to work out a lot and learned a lot about the game and the plays and that kind of thing. So that was my senior year in high school.
That's fascinating. and an interesting position. It's not something that we have here afforded to students, but that means they must have seen something in you to be the manager of the basketball team in your high
Well,
school.
manager means a different thing. So let me just correct that. The manager, it was the guy that took care of all the uniforms, made sure everything was clean for practice, was make sure that everything was available for the bus for the away games. You took care of all the valuables for the and if there was any it's a lot of little menial things. For example, if there was any sweat on the floor, any condensation from the rain outside and it was warm inside, the floor got very damp and slippery. So the manager also went out with the towels and scrubbed the floor and made sure that the floor was dry. So I wasn't the coach and I wasn't the club secretary. I wasn't arranging the schedule or the practices or anything. It was just a menial job as the manager. But you needed a manager to get the uniforms clean and dried and all that stuff.
Absolutely. And, it's an integral part of the team. And as you mentioned, you got to get exposed and learn about some various tactics and the infrastructure and the inner workings of how a team works. So I have to ask that. Are you still a basketball fan today?
Still a fan, can't play much anymore. Used to have a basketball court in the backyard, and our kids all grew up playing the game. But I don't move around too much anymore.
Understandable, understandable. John, you've had a fascinating upbringing. I'm just watching the arc and I see there's like a fundamental determination and hard work, and you seem like a very organized guy. I'm very curious about how your life developed after high school. What was university a thing that you went into? Did you get straight into work? Perhaps you could explain a little bit about the next step that you took following high school.
Yeah, following high school, at this time of year or a little earlier, most of the students that are juniors and seniors in high school are applying to many colleges. They're looking around for the best education, or the major they choose will, give them the best chance at acceptance into college and on into life. My mom said to me after I brought home an application from the high school, one of the priests at the high school said, "John, take this application home, fill it out, and discuss it with your parents, but send it in." I was given the application, took it home, filled it out. I said, "Mom, there's a problem with this thing that they require a $40 application fee." And she said, "Well, you got the money, you've got a savings account." Now, the big part of that story is I was always reluctant to spend money. So I'm careful with my dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So she said, "I'll take you down to the bank. You can get a cashier's check." I didn't know what that was. "And you can attach it to the application." I said, "Oh, okay, Mom." So we went through that process. And a few weeks later, I was home. I don't know why I was home on a Saturday, because normally every day it was a work day. You're either in school or you're working. So I was home that day and the mail came and Mom said, "It's for you." And I looked at it and I said, "Oh, it's an application. I've been accepted to the University of Santa Clara in California." I said, "But I don't know if I'll go." And she said, "Of course you will." And that was it. I was applied to one school. I was accepted and I went, and I went 4 years there, graduated, did quite well. Now, the adjunct to that, the follow on, is there's compulsory military service in the United States at that time. So everybody was either going to be drafted or chose the service. I was 2 years in Army ROTC. That's the Reserve Officers Training that they have in U.S. universities. I took Army ROTC, but the problem is I was so focused on a schedule for life. I wanted to make sure that when I finished college, I had military service and I could go to my graduate school and I could go on to my career. I had a very scheduled kind of a life plan for myself. After 2 years, I decided the Army, they had so many of these young officer candidates coming through that my service would be delayed at least 2 years. I found out that if I joined the Marines, I could accept the commission immediately upon graduation. I could serve my time in the military and I could get on with my graduate training and so on. So I did. I took a commission in the United States Marine Corps. Probably one of the best decisions I made because that was a very structured and very disciplined life and program. I got on with that. I was very, very happy with my period of service in the Marine Corps. Then I went on to graduate school. So while I was still on active duty, I was stationed in Japan, Okinawa, Philippines. When I was discharged, I had applied to about 10 different colleges I looked at, and I applied a couple, three seriously, but I was accepted at UCLA, where after a year and a half or 2 years, I got my MBA, Master's of Business Administration. And from there, my objective always is to travel a little bit. They call it a gap year now, but it wasn't a gap year for me. It was just a period of I traveled a little bit on active duty, and I wanted to continue seeing a little bit more of the world before I settled down. I traveled to Europe that summer, and it was 1960 now. I went to all over Europe. I went from inside the Arctic Circle to North Africa, Tangier, from Narvik in Norway to Tangier, with stops all along the way. Stayed with a family in Helsinki. I was all around the place. I had a Eurail pass that was very helpful. And finally, the Eurail pass it was all used up by the time I got to Bari and Brindisi in Italy. Along the way, I was able to do a lot of different things, one of which is I went to the Olympic Games in Rome in 1960. That was a lot of fun and interesting. Got to see the opening ceremonies. I got to see some of the great basketball players play for the U.S. Saw a game there. I saw wrestling, whatever it was. Whatever I saw was either free or gratis tickets somewhere along the way. I was traveling. I was spending less than $5 a day all over Europe that summer. So let's see. I took a boat from Brindisi to Athens, and I ended up traveling all through the Middle East, Greece, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon. I went to Iran, Pakistan, India, traveled across India on the railroad. I got to Calcutta, though. I was kind of tired, and I'd lost a lot of weight because you can get sick a few times traveling the way I did. Then I got to Calcutta. Calcutta is a place, I'm sure it's much nicer now, but there were a lot of poor people. I'll tell you, it was so bad that Mother Teresa hadn't gotten there yet. I went from Calcutta. I bought an air ticket in a travel agency in Calcutta. And the guy I bought it from had been a classmate at UCLA when I got my MBA. That's how small the world was. So then I got down to Rangoon and then on to Singapore. I went to Taiwan, Hong Kong. Ended up in Japan. I got to Osaka. I was in Japan for, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, something like that. Then I went to Hawaii and I came home in November. So I went around the world in 180 days. Not 80 days, but 180 days. I like to travel. I've been to many countries. Those countries were, where you get to Thailand, for example, you get to Bangkok and you want to see all of the shrines. Then you just walk out in the country. You take the bus to the end of the bus line, you just walk out in the country. So I wore out a pair of shoes. When I got to Hong Kong, I bought a new pair of shoes.
That's incredible. That's incredible, John. You mentioned travel a few times before that question, and I was going to coax you on it, but you just went right ahead. And I can tell you're super passionate about that. I can see you have an adventurous spirit, and especially with some of the trips that you mentioned there. Any country or particular countries stand out for you as places that some of your favorite places you visited, or just something that resonated with you out of all the places that you've been?
No, I really liked. I don't know how many countries it is that I've been to. One of my grandsons asked me recently how many countries I've been to, and I told him 40. Like a few days later, I told him 50. I don't know, it's 56. Some of the countries have changed their names, as I mentioned. Burma's no longer Burma, it's Myanmar, and East Germany is no longer East Germany. And so I can't tell you exactly the number anymore, but I still like to travel. Now, the most recent trip that I could recall is in 2004. I had some grandchildren by this time, and Marge said, "You can go on a trip." My wife said, "As long as you're back by the grandchildren's birthday." I went with my uh, golf clubs and a small bag, and I went to New Zealand. I played golf, I think it was 8 straight days in New Zealand. Played in the North Island, played in the South Island. I met people along the way. Obviously, you don't play by yourself. And I had a wonderful time just playing golf and making new friends. So I can still do it.
Oh wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. And it's some journey, I guess, from all parts of the world. I have to ask, being in so many places and across different time zones and different parts of your life, was there a memory of a particular famous historic event that you can remember that you experienced and it really stuck out for you?
Well, let's see. A couple, three things come to mind. When I was in the Marine Corps on active duty, we had a guy in our platoon, in our squadron. He was in my duty section when I was a Marine Air Controller, and he went on to become very infamous. He actually murdered President Kennedy. His name was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh man.
So that was one guy in my platoon, and then in my squadron. And then another time when we were visiting, we were on a maneuver in the Philippines. Our squadron was set up on the island of Corregidor, which is a famous battle site in World War II. We had a visit from John Wayne, a famous movie actor, and he came and spent some time with our squadron and was very gracious, very nice guy. And he spent a lot of time with the enlisted men, drinking beer with them, and he spent a lot of time with the officers, and they were all over him, telling him that he was the reason they joined the Marine Corps because he'd done those Marine Corps movies like Guadalcanal Diary and things like that. So he was very gracious with us. I had some. I had a camera in my pocket, and I took pictures of John Wayne. And there's one picture with Lee Harvey Oswald, who was on mess duty, in the background. And when they were doing a lot of background material on Lee Harvey Oswald, I was interviewed a few times, and they asked me for the pictures. I'd show them a lot of pictures of us when we were hitting the beaches and setting up things. I had pictures of Oswald, but I had the one picture with John Wayne and Oswald in the background, and I wouldn't release it unless John Wayne gave permission. Now later on, I'm living here in the same house, and I've got my children growing up, and it's the 1970s. They kept asking me if they could have that picture. This is probably Life Magazine or Reader's Digest, one of those. So finally, they asked John Wayne, who was dying at the UCLA hospital, if he would release that picture, and he didn't know I had it, and so they told him. 45 minutes after he said okay, there was somebody at my house for that picture, and it was published.
Wow, that is a fascinating story, John. Your life's a little bit like a movie. You're talking about movie stars like John Wayne, but that experience and the overlap with what happened with Lee Harvey Oswald as well. I mean, this, I couldn't have. I asked the question wondering if you had a specific experience during a historic event, but I didn't realize that, you were so intermeshed in two characters that very much are part of the history and fabric of America in some ways positive and in some ways negative. Incredible story, John. Really glad to hear that one. The tragic event that happened with the president, can you go through how perhaps you were feeling at that time given that you had spent some time in active service duty with the man that was perpetrated to have assassinated President Kennedy, like what was going through your mind? Maybe tell a little bit about where you were and what you were going through.
It was Friday afternoon that President Kennedy was assassinated. We were all, shocked and saddened all weekend long. On Sunday morning, they had on television. They had the bringing of Lee Harvey Oswald from outside, moving from one part of the jail to another, and they had the character Jack Ruby moving, inside the Dallas Police Department. Jack Ruby, is the one who then minutes later had a pistol and shot Oswald dead in the basement of the police department. So Marge and I are sitting there, we're watching it on TV. We had a little black and white TV. We were just married. That was in '63, and we were married in '61. So we were living in a modest apartment in Santa Monica. And Marge and the people I knew always thought I was an exaggerator. I might say something, but it might not be 100% true. But I don't think that's fair at all. But that's nevertheless the reputation I had. So I went to, I collected only a few photos of my life. I had a shoebox full of photos. And, I was talking about earlier how I'd taken pictures of the Marines when we were in the Philippines and stuff. So I went to the shoebox and I pulled out pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald. Then she believed me that I really did know that character. It
Wow.
wasn't long after that the people from Time Life magazine came and they wanted to interview me. They'd gone back to Marine Corps headquarters and they'd found out the guys that were associated with Oswald when he was on active duty. They had a pretty good profile, a bio of him, not long after he became infamous. So it wasn't that long that people came and asked my impressions and opinions and if I had any pictures, and I did. I did not want to profit from President Kennedy's assassination, so I said, you can have these, but I don't want to in any way to profit from that. But later on, they insisted that there be some small compensation, so I got $15 here and $20 there for some pictures that were published.
Wow, just incredible, John. I suppose that takes us on to, you're serving your active duty, but as I understand, you had quite an illustrious and strong working career following all of that. Your son had mentioned that you joined quite a big tech firm that grew to become quite a big giant. Perhaps you could share a little bit about that, where you were working, and what the first days of that were like.
Yeah, here's what happened. I came back from my trip around the world. I wasn't married, but I was intending to get married, and so I proposed soon after I returned. I interviewed a bunch of companies. I must have interviewed 5, 10 companies. I need to get a job and get going. I had an MBA, so that was an advantage. And so I eventually was hired by IBM, and I went to work for them in February of 1961. And I ended up working for IBM for 30 and a half years. I retired in, I think it was June 30th of 1991. Now, along the way, I was a trainee in the beginning. I didn't know anything about this, but IBM trains you perfectly. The beginning of the business, when those days they just started doing big computers. And so they were still doing primarily their business was from the punch card business. So I learned the punch card part. Now, it wasn't just keying it into a card, it was sorting it into some sequence and then putting it into an accounting machine where it tabulated and gave reports. And if it needed some other calculations, there was a calculator there for you. You put the punch cards in, the calculations were punched in the cards, pull them out, put them in the accounting machine, list them again with new answers. Now, you could use the punch card in a variety of ways, and this is the early part of my sales career. I went and called on customers, cold calls on customers, to try to convert them from the manual methods of pencil, paper, and adding machines, and to take the information that was in the punch card and use it over and over again. So if you punch that information in there for an invoice, you could use that information over and over again for a sales report or for some collections and that kind of thing. So, or you could use it for the statements that you mailed and on and on. You try to understand the customer's business, and then you would adapt the punch card method for that. Not long after that, though, I was transferred to a data center and I learned about the 1401 computer. That was the new, young, small computer. Customers could have one of these computers for as little as $3,000 a month. That's a lot of money. And you had to find a lot of justification in the business to spend $3,000 a month on a computer, because you still needed to punch the cards. Now, you could attach the tapes to the computer, and the tapes were great, but they still hadn't perfected the disk drives for the computer yet. And that took another couple of years. When they announced the small disk drives on the next computer, which was the 1440, that computer could hold as much as 2,000 bytes, 2,000 characters. Can you imagine that removable disk drives could hold 2,000 characters? Now, they didn't really get to hold 2,000 characters either, because you had to block the records, and not all the records were the same size, and that sort of thing. So it was a fixed record kind of thing with a lot of wasted space. So that was the 1401, my first computer, 1440, my second computer. But now I was launched into a computer career. I now had I didn't have the new accounts anymore. I had medium-sized businesses. And then I started getting into different industries and selling computers to those industries. And eventually I got bigger accounts. I eventually had some of the largest accounts on the West Coast. I had been a team leader for the UCLA account. The UCLA had so many of IBM's computers. We had 30 people on the campus that were just IBM employees. After that, I got promoted to become a sales instructor. I did that for a while. Then I had some time in IBM staff work where we had litigation, where a lot of companies were suing IBM for being a monopoly. And we beat all those allegations in court. I was there for that time in the 70s. Now I was back out in the field again. I'd been a small account guy. I'd been a large account guy. Now they wanted me to be a large account guy selling small systems. IBM had invented some small computers by this time. The System 3 series, the 32, the 34, 36, 38 computers were small computers that really weren't placed in big companies a lot, because big companies had large computers and big rooms, like I'd sold earlier. So I did that for a few years, and then I was promoted to the staff again now, and then on, and that was for large account activity, teach the people about that and to manage those staff activities. I was a manager. Then in Southern California in Orange County. Then I was a manager in western part of LA and Santa Monica. And eventually then they gave me a job. Now I wasn't promoted from manager. I was demoted from manager. I'd reached my Peter principle by this time. And it's always hard to say you got demoted, but I wasn't doing that job anymore. But they gave me the job of the team leader on a very large account. McDonnell Douglas had a very large presence in Southern California. In fact, it was the largest account on the West Coast, and that included Boeing and all, American Express, any other big account you can think of on the West Coast of the United States. But it was such a big account that it had a hangar with all the computers in it, and it had a second floor just for the disk drives. McDonnell Douglas had a very large presence. I was the lead guy there for 5 years until I retired in 1991.
Wow, that's a remarkable career, John. And I guess you must be immensely proud from the very humble beginnings and, you're cold calling, small customers and all the way to these large accounts. It's a truly fascinating progression. Were you a little bit both fulfilled, but also a tiny bit sad when you hung up your boots, so to say, with respect to that position?
No, it was time. I was 56 years old. I had accomplished quite a bit. I'd gotten sick at the end. It was time to pass on. But I retired on like June 30th, and after the 4th of July weekend, I went to work for another company where I sold small computers and services. That lasted about 3 months or so because now, I was picking and choosing my jobs. I had been with one company for a long time and didn't have to interview. Now I was looking for one job and then another job. I think I had 4 jobs in the next 10 years. I worked for a small company selling uninterruptible power supplies and accessories, power strips and things. Then I worked for another company selling software. It was nonstop software. You put this software on 2 different computers. They would talk to each other and mirror each other, back each other up. That was interesting. Did that for a while. That was the end of that one. That was my last job. And I was a regional manager for the Midwest. I was on the plane a lot. I was, headquartered here in Southern California, but all the customers were in the middle of the country. So I was on the plane a lot. I did that job for a year and a half or so. Then I resigned again. And then they came back and got me. They had some other things they wanted me to do. And I did some training of some people. And then I just started working part-time for them. And I stopped doing that when I was 66.
Wow. John, you've accomplished a heck of a lot in your life, whether it was in your professional career or, exploring the world. I have to ask, is there anything you wish that you could have done, or perhaps any unfulfilled ambitions that maybe you didn't get a chance to do?
No, I don't think so. It was pretty clear I wasn't going to be president of IBM. And I figured that out the first weeks when I was trying to get those punch cards and calculators and accounting machines to work. I was pretty well fulfilled. The best part, I think, was the fact that I was recognized as a talent, and IBM invested an awful lot in me in the additional education. So along the way, and when I was a salesman or I was on the staff, they would send me to additional training. The first one I went to was a 2-week course with Harvard professors, and they used the case study method. I got the feeling for advanced graduate training in business. I had an MBA. I had a lot of time in the business. By the time I probably had 15 years or so, and that helped me as a businessman to understand the customer better. And I think then a couple of years later, I was given an additional week of training with Harvard professors again in the Boston area, and that further solidified my talents and developed my talent as a business professional. The part that I always tried to teach when I was a manager and when I was an instructor was not just selling computers, but you're selling solutions. And so when you're selling solutions, you have to put yourself in the place of the business that you're talking to. And I felt that if you're selling medium and small businesses, you had to be talking to the president and the decision maker, along the way gathering support from the people that were going to be running the business at the operational level. The part that was very difficult to do was to take a young person just out of college and just finished the IBM training program and to get them to sell solutions, to understand the customer's business and go in and talk to the principal like they were an equal, and to get them to have that confidence that they were an equal and they could talk to the customer about their business. When I was able to finally learn to do that as a more mature person, I was extremely successful. I had conversations with the top people in businesses in California. Probably the highest guy I ever talked to is John McDonnell at McDonnell Douglas, who is running a vast company of locations around North America. He was extremely accessible for me. But I did talk to a lot of presidents of divisions, having them understand what the technology of the day was. Many of them had come up in their operationally in their business and succeeded, but they had no idea what technology was. They did not believe that they needed to secure their data. They didn't believe that they had to administer their data and manage the people in the tech part of their business. They just said, well, we give that to the finance guy. He's got to run it. That's not the way it was. That's not the way it should be. They should be managing their chief information officer, promoting the people to that status, that level, and treating them like any other vice president in their business. Very hard sell. That was the kind of selling I was doing at the end. It wasn't a technology sell and it wasn't a solution sell. It was an organizational sale.
Wow. I mean, John, even in this short call, I feel it's been tremendously insightful with some of the experience that you garnered, from practical exposure in the work that you did. Now, as I understand that you have children and both grandchildren, if you were to pass on some of that insight to your grandchildren or give them maybe, one or two tips that would serve them well in life, professionally and personally, what would you say to them?
First of all, treat your family and your friends and have faith. Also, treat the least person that you run into like they're the most important person. Again, I focus on education and I focus on family, friends, and faith. Then there's always the hard work. It's easy to assume you're going to be successful, and you should always believe and be confident that you're going to be successful. But you should also be willing to do the hard work. Get up early and stay late. I can just recall a few little things. When I was a manager in Orange County here in California, I would try to beat the traffic and get to work. Or if I was had customers in different time zones, I'd get up earlier and make the phone calls. If I had a Monday morning appointment in Chicago, I didn't wait and get on the plane on Monday morning. I got there on Sunday night. That meant that there was no Sunday. That was Sunday morning on the plane, Sunday night in a hotel, and Sunday morning and Monday morning bright and early in the customer's office with a white shirt, a suit, a tie, and a smile.
Those are great values to live by, John. Is there something that perhaps you want to share, or maybe we've missed? You've lived a very colorful and illustrious life, and I would hate to miss any of these nuggets. Anything perhaps you'd like to share?
I met my wife before I took my trip around the world. I married her when I came back. I lived 62 years with her.
That's touching. That's incredible.
She's responsible for our children's success and for my happiness. Appreciate her.
That's beautiful to hear, John. And, you're a very special guy, and I'm sure she was a very special partner for you throughout that period. And you reflect that wonderfully. And I'm glad you shared that as part of this call. So, John, when I met you, I knew you as Joe's father. However, following this conversation today, which I've been very fortunate to ask what I learned about you, what is an incredibly resilient, organized, hardworking man who has a free, adventurous spirit and doesn't let hard work and business get in the way, still respects things that matter to you most in life: family, friends, faith, very strong moral values. You've been an absolute delight to interview. I'm honored to have had the chance to meet you. I still believe you're a traveler at heart and a golfer. So if you ever do come past Ireland, it would be great to shake your hand, sir. Again, just like to thank you for this interview and hope you had a nice time here at Audio Life.
Thanks very much, Gafur. I've enjoyed talking with you and sharing my life experiences. Good luck to you. All the best.